Light cuts into darkness as the camera follows an ROV down a shaft of cold blue, then black, where silt moves like breath across a sleeping seabed. A robotic arm brushes aside a skin of time from torn aluminum, and out of the gray bloom, letters rise, 774B. A long, skeletal wing lies nested in sand ripples, the metal frayed like paper torn by invisible hands. Above the waterline, the tape rolls to the final broadcast at 1859, a clipped, strained voice over static. Makana Tower, 74 Bravo. We have. The rest is swallowed and replaced with a flat line of hiss, the kind of silence that rearranges a life. It is the last living sound of a flight that lifted off at 1812 and, inside 47 minutes, vanished so completely that an island learned to lower its voice when it said the pilot's name. Years pass. The ocean forgets nothing. It files everything away under pressure, temperature, depth, and indifference. But even the Pacific runs out of places to hide. In that lightless vault, the tail number tells a story in fewer characters than a headline. It is a signature. It is an accusation. It is a name written in metal that salt could not erase. What happened in those 47 minutes that could drown a town in silence for 20 years? The arm lifts another plate, and with a cough of sand the truth blinks. The tail number is the missing charter plane everyone stopped talking about. And what it reveals will pull the island back into a storm it thought had passed. Wind combs Makana Atoll the way a hand combs hair, endlessly, tenderly, sometimes cruel. The airstrip is a rust-red line dragged over coral, its edges gnawed by salt, its paint faded to the color of old blood. People here read tides the way others read calendars. They take their cues from wind socks and the pitch of reflash swell. Into this rhythm moves Dan Rourke, 34, pilot by necessity and by a quiet love that made him look up at dawn as if the sky were a promise. He is a steady presence at blue current air, eyes clear, steps quick, capable hands stained by grease and salt spray. Beside him, in air and on paper, is Harold Kemp, gruff, practical, always calculating the difference between what the ledger says and what fuel costs this week. The hangar's doors are salt-eaten and stubborn, sticks an inch from the concrete on humid days with a squawk that carries halfway down the runway. Dan and Lena make their life inside modest walls. A kitchen table with a plastic bin of invoices sliding over its surface like a tide of paper. A small apartment fan that turns with a tired rattle. A little girl at that same table coloring planes with blue crayons. The engine always bigger than the cockpit. The sky always a perfect rectangle of color. The business is never easy. Maintenance arrives like weather. Again, never when expected. Parts must be ordered from places that do not know how far Makana feels when storms rise. The ocean gives work, takes calm, gnaws at profit margins and aluminum alike. And yet, the rhythm holds. Flights leave and return. Crates move. Fishermen wave. A good day keeps the lights on and the conversation hopeful. But in the scrape of those doors after dark, in the way keys change hands between partners, in the ledger pages that flip quicker when wind speeds climb, something else moves through the hangar. The nights are locked, the island says. The nights are quiet. Still, who else had keys to Dan's life, his plane, his future? The answers do not live in daylight, and the hangar keeps its own hours. April 12th, 2002 begins like 100 other working days on Makana. Heat that climbs the spine, air that tastes of brine, a sky so clear the horizon looks like a rule drawn with a strict hand. The manifest is short. 2 sealed crates bound for Nakoa Island. Dry goods that clink like jars when shifted, total weight penciled with care. At 17:58, Dan performs his pre-flight, walking the aircraft like a farmer walks a fence. Hand on rivet lines, eye on surfaces, fingertip on tape frayed near the tail, an afterthought in that light, a memory later magnified by loss. He taps the controls, checks fuel and oil, breathes, and climbs into the seat that knows his jacket, his reach, his way of easing the throttle open like a secret. At 1812, wheels roll, nose lifts, the runway falls behind like a sentence finished. Radar paints him in faint sweeps, a small echo moving northwest into an expanse labeled in paperwork as routine. At 1843, a weather cell blooms on satellite like an ink stain, the kind that grows edges no one invited. From a trawler riding the chop, a deckhand hears a low rumble that he later struggles to place. Engine? Thunder? Fear invents sound, but water carries it. At 1852, tower requests position. At 1857, a check-in, clear but thin. And then 1859. Makana Tower, 74 Bravo, we have. The sentence breaks like a rope pulled too fast over a rusted edge. It doesn't fray, it snaps. After that, there is only the old heartbeat of static. No yelty ping slices the night. No seat cushion bobs toward shore. The map grows a hole the size of a human life, a business, a family. If weather was the culprit, why did the radio die mid-syllable, right as the voice reached for help? The line goes flat, and the clock in the corner of the screen keeps moving, indifferent, exact. The next hours will be loud, frantic, purposeful, but they will not bring sound back to that channel. Dawn finds Makana already awake and waiting for answers. The search grid is drawn in red over a blue-gray sea, squares and rectangles mapped to currents and drift models, a geometry of hope. A Coast Guard cutter grinds through chop. A borrowed helicopter scissoring the air pushes down spray in luminous halos. Local boats weave the perimeters with eyes narrowed against glare. The drop-offs here are abrupt. One moment a shallow shelf alive with light. The next a blue so deep it reads as black. The seabed falling away like a thought that will not be finished. On the pier, Lena stands with a thermos that loses heat and then purpose in her hands. She looks where the boats look, then farther, then not at all. In an office that smells of paper warmed by sun, Harold signs statements with a steady pen, repeating that maintenance was done by the book, the phrase neat as a tie, meant to hold. There are small things that feel like answers. A damaged cooler that could be from any boat, a palm frond caught by a rope that must belong to someone else, a smear on water that looks like oil until it shines and shows itself as light. The checklist pages turn, the command post chatter hums with coordinates, theories, schedules. Controlled flight into terrain is a phrase that fits on a line. Out here, terrain is a flat, moving, bottomless surface. The label gives a form to emptiness. It does not give a reason. In an office off the runway, a maintenance log sits open under a slow fan. Stamps mark 3 entries on the same date. The ink looks different, one a faded violet, one black and wet, one somewhere in between. Same day, different hands. The storm rolled in. The storm rolled out. Was it coincidence or cover? Day 3 ends with the sea looking as innocent as it did at dawn, and silence learning to sit down in chairs that used to hold laughter. Grief speaks loudly at first on Makana, then learns to drop its voice to be polite in grocery aisles and on church steps. At the harbor bar, the air is soft with beer and salt, and people fill the gap with stories. One says smuggling, because sealed crates feel like secrets, and secrets need someone to hold them. Another whispers debt, because money is the wind that bends everyone's spine here, even the straightest. A third swears he saw Dan argue with a mechanic, voices climbing like a siren, the week before the flight. The bartender wipes the counter with slow, practiced circles and says nothing until the radio drops a song he hates, then offers his own line. Dan was careful, too careful to push a bad bird into a bad patch of sky. Across the road, the church sets out folding chairs for a vigil. The wooden smell of floor polish hangs with candle smoke, and at the front, a child's drawing of a blue plane spreads across paper, wings too big to fit, the sky pushing at the edges. People bring casseroles lined up beneath aluminum foil that keeps in warmth and steam, but cannot keep out what everyone thinks when they look at Lena's eyes. Phone calls click in the night, overheard through cracked windows, names said and unsaid, claims framed as concern, gossip with its sleeves rolled up. Rumor becomes comfort the way salt becomes rust, slowly, inevitably, and with a cost that only shows later. An offhand comment floats over plastic cups and lukewarm coffee. Someone drove past the airfield after midnight, and the hangar lights were on. Locked nights, locked doors, the island says. The lights were on. Who was working in the shadows when everyone else slept? That question finds a chair in the back row and sits without being asked to leave. She arrived with a clipboard and the efficient kindness of someone trained to take careful notes, then stayed with a box and an ache that never misfiled a single page. Investigator Mara Ito traced the case along the same pathways the island uses to hear itself: repair bays, docksides, break rooms, a hangar that smells like old rain and aluminum dust. She photographed rivet lines with a neat patience, drew her own careful circles around the drill holes, and dog-eared pilot logbooks until their corners curled like dried leaves. In the maintenance binder, she found 3 entries stamped with the same date, the signatures uniform enough to be trustworthy at a glance, different enough under a magnifier to ask for context. In the trash bay behind the hangar, under a split bag that bled coffee and cardboard, she retrieved a receipt for stainless safety wire from a supplier who ships slow and bills fast. No one remembered ordering it. No one remembered using it. She requested parts lists and got copies with edges still warm from the copier's light. When she read them, she found a part number that did not belong on Dan's model, an upgrade. Someone had said when she asked, a word that sounded like optimism pressed into service as explanation. Budget cuts trimmed her caseload and moved her office and changed the color of her inbox, but not the nag of a case that refused to soften. The box under her desk read, Makana 02, in black marker that smudged on her fingers when the weather turned wet. Obsession is not messy when it is honest. It is tabs and highlights and string pulled taut between points that others stop seeing as connected. She circled that part number with a red pen until the ring looked less like an emphasis and more like a wound. Why would anyone upgrade a control system on a plane that struggled to afford fuel? The question bent the light around it. Answers, for now, stayed out of frame. But the circle did not fade. Time taught everyone a trick. How to get up and do the day while a piece of it never moves past the same date on the calendar. The case learned to stand in corners and wait for attention. In its waiting, it accumulated weight. A diver surfaced one summer with a grin wide enough to split his face and a handful of corroded aluminum that glittered like treasure. It turned out to be from a World War II wreck, the edges stamped with a history that wasn't Dan's. An ex-con came forward with a folded marina photo that smelled like cigarettes and rain, swearing the man in the background was Dan living quick and quiet under a new name. The shoes in that snapshot were the kind Dan never wore, too shiny, too new, too something else. On a wind-scoured day, a crate was found in a bed of deep seagrass, barnacled but whole, the size a match to the shipping manifest, and the hope like a flare that lights the inside of the eyes first. The serial sticker peeled back with a fingernail to reveal it belonged to a pharmacy shipment that never left a different island's pier. Each near break sharpened hope and then sanded it down to dust, the way waves sculpt rocks into shapes they did not consent to. Witness accounts contradicted themselves in small, human ways, times slightly off, distances guessed wrong, moods misremembered because fear rewrites tone. The red string board in Mara's office grew lines that connected people to places and events to dates until it looked less like an investigation and more like a map of a heart mid-surgery. Then the funding changed. The meetings that used to include Makana lost interest. Other crises had louder sirens. The box under Mara's desk was sealed with dull tape whose gray made the black letters on its side feel like a dare. How do you keep believing when the ocean keeps saying no? She moved offices again, carried the weight again, and told herself she might be wrong, then told herself she wasn't, then stopped talking to herself at all about it. Waiting became the work. The box waited with her. Absence is a climate of its own. It settles over houses and routines until even dust moves differently through it. Lena traded the hiss of surf for the hum of a discount freezer in a small inland apartment whose walls learned her shape by the way she leaned against them when phone calls came without news. She returned groceries with uncracked seals because the tired cashier did not punch the code fast enough. And she watched the same shows with the volume low because silence had started to feel like a person who lived with them. Their daughter grew from drawing big-winged planes to storing the blue crayon in a shoebox with other objects that hold answers only children can hear. A bottle cap from a beach day, a ticket stub faded to near white, a note with Dan's blocky handwriting that said he would be late, but not too late. Anniversaries reduced themselves to quiet dinners that tasted like obligation and then to drives where no one reached for the radio. On Makana, the hangar door still stuck in the same place, and men swore softly as they forced it over the lip, then swore again because swearing didn't help. No one fixed it. In offices where new problems stacked themselves near the door, the case became a file behind newer files, weight behind newer weight, not a priority but never truly forgotten. The way a scar is not a priority but is never absent. The weather kept its own calendar. The island learned to predict tourist questions before they asked them and to route conversations away from names that did not lie easily on the tongue. Technology elsewhere, on ships that mapped oceans for reasons unrelated to grief, taught itself new ways to look down into dark. The future was learning how to listen to the seafloor. Soon, without meaning to help anyone on Makana, it would. What does the ocean reveal when you ask with better ears? Winter ends, one day at a time. The seabed waits, as it always has, for questions phrased correctly. In 2019, A telecom survey ship traced slow squares over the continental shelf off Mackinac, patient as a finger reading Braille. Its sidescan sonar printed a grayscale dreamscape across monitors. Dunes of sand that never move but are always moving. Gullies carved by currents that do not care about coordinates. The magnetometer hummed in data and then jumped, a sharp spike at 1,820 meters that interrupted the uniform song of sediment and stone. The ROV descended through a column of midnight with lights that made halos of small things. Tiny shrimp spinning like punctuation in an unread paragraph, snow of organic fall that drifted without ever landing. And then metal, an engine block, its curves softened by corrosion but unmistakable, lay shouldered into a small depression. The cockpit ahead of it was shattered in a way that reads to trained eyes as acceleration, then impact, not impact alone. The tailplane sat at an angle that looked almost deliberate, almost posed, a geometry pressed into afterlife by pressure and time. A corroded identification plate came free from a rivet with the faintest twist. The characters still held their ground against decades, and when the serial numbers were cross-checked, they walked back across the years to Dan's Lycoming engine without hesitation. The screen filled with tranquil ruin, and in a control room full of blinking equipment, breath synced to the ROV's muted thrusters for a few beats longer than necessary. The ocean kept its secret. It did not keep it forever. A technician panned the camera along a control run where cable should have read as a line of braided metalless uniform thickness. At the break, the inside brightness was wrong. Too clean for the sea, too telling for accident. Edges spoke in the quiet grammar of force and tool and timing. Can steel tell you if a hand or a hurricane broke it? The ROV backed out, then returned for closer frames. The camera was steady, almost reverent. The metal was not. It had a story to tell, and given light and attention, it started. The laboratory smelled like solvent and tired coffee and the precise promise of answers. Under magnification, the elevator control cables broken and became a landscape, its strands visible as braided fields. Its failure faced a terrain of ridges, striations, micro-gouges that, to the trained, divide truth from excuse. Overload breaks look like a wild tear, force distributed at failure, edges flared and uneven. This one did not bloom like that. This one had parallel marks, clean beginnings that ran against the grain with an intent too tidy for weather. Elsewhere in the wreckage basket, a small bundle of ancillary lines bore residue that fluoresced a cheap blue under UV. Zip ties had held what should never have been bound. On the hinge pin that should have been wired with specific gauge, the off-spec safety wire bit into metal in a pattern more consistent with home repair than the neat, code-bound cross and loop expected in certified maintenance. The gauge matched a purchase Mara had circled years earlier, the unaccounted coil of stainless wire that no one remembered buying. Paperwork stepped in to complete what metal began to say. The log entries that swore the work happened by the book now glowed like a flare for all the wrong reason. A policy filed 12 days before the flight named outcomes no one wants to consider until loss leans a chair against the door. Its limits doubled on death. Its beneficiary lines curved toward the company that would struggle to live without its best pilot. Access, motive, knowledge, the triad that narrows a crowd to a face. Harold Kemp had keys that opened after hours. He signed entries that spoke in 2 inks on one day. He placed an order under his login for control cables 2 weeks before the crash, a purchase that made sense only if something else was planned alongside it. Was this bad maintenance, negligence that dressed as thrift, or a designed failure that needed the ocean to close the loop and right the cause and curse of water? In rooms far from Macana's heat, evidence arranged itself like cards laid down with a practiced hand. The story sharpened. The circle tightened. The knock at Harold Kemp's organ door was 3 hard beats of bone on wood that could have been a neighbor if it hadn't carried a rhythm people recognize without teaching. Inside an interview room later, the clock's seconds hand clicked with a thin, bright sound that made time feel like glass. He blamed weather first, because storms are easy villains. He blamed Dan next, because the dead cannot answer, and work is hard and risk is real. He gestured toward those crates, because sealed things invite suspicion, and it is efficient to fit your story to a shape people already whispered. The photographs were patient, the lab reports quieter still, the key ring with duplicates more eloquent than memory. When the mechanical drawings lay side by side with images of striation patterns that said cut, not torn, something in Harold's voice lost its edge. He buckled, not like a bridge, but like a man who has watched his own lie from inside for too long. He said he nicked the elevator cable, just enough to sit through pre-flight and taxi, just enough to climb, then fail under tension where sky and speed would write the rest. He swapped the gauge on the safety wire knowingly, counted on it to hold while Dan's hands were still on the ground, and to give after both wheels forgot the runway. He thought the storm would do him the favor of authorship. He thought the sea would take what he started and finish it in a language no one could translate. Those 47 minutes were a clock, he said. Wheels up, climb, air cool and thin, tension rising minute by minute until the part with the nick met the load it was promised. When it failed, it would feel like weather crueling up from the horizon. He pleaded to second-degree murder and fraud when the calculus finally included his own survival less and truth more. In the transcript, his voice thins when the time of the act is read back to him, a tone people use when they are finally more tired than they are stubborn. He admits one more thing before the recorder clicks off. He turned on the hangar lights after midnight, just to check something. How many times did he stand in that doorway, rehearsing a murder he would blame on weather? The room is quiet, and for once, no clock is loud enough to be heard. Morning lays itself softly over Makana, as if the island were a shoulder finally relaxed. On the old pier, a plaque is bolted to weathered wood with stainless screws that will outlive the decade, bright buttons against gray. Lena stands beside her daughter, who is taller now than the memory that still shows her sitting at a kitchen table with a blue crayon. The ocean throws sunlight like coins across the harbor, and for once, it feels like an offering rather than a ransom. Detective Mara Ito attends with a suit that doesn't fit the humidity and a small smile that looks like an exhale after a long swim. Her box is empty, her string coiled into a drawer where other cases wait to be possible. The island gathers and says Dan's name the way the tide says reef, gently, repeatedly, without swallowing it. In speeches that avoid melodrama, people talk about an airstrip that ate shoes, doors that stuck, invoices counted at a kitchen table, a small business fed by wind and work. In quiet pockets of the crowd, anger walks its loops and then sits down, not because forgiveness is cheap, but because exhaustion has finally earned some rest. The ocean does not forgive and does not accuse. It keeps perfect records at depths beyond light and lets us read them only when our tools and will are precise enough to deserve it. Justice comes late more often than anyone wants. It still weighs what it should, even when the scales are old and the hands are shaking. As the plaque is covered with a cloth and then uncovered for cameras with unsteady hands, the water below slaps pilings with the patient rhythm that trained the island's sleep for generations. Secrets sink. Truth is heavier. When the sea is your runway and your graveyard, what do you trust? Craft, weather, or the hands that touch the bolts? The tide answers with motion. The island answers by standing still, together, long enough to hear its own heart.